Welcome to Living in Connection, where we explore the nature of physical and non-physical reality and what that means in your life.
Well, welcome back. Hi and hello. I'm Dirk Dunning. This is Frank DeMarco, and we were just chatting about magic and things. And Frank had the idea that we should move off into religion and science. And he has some quotes, I think, from Muddy Tracks he wants to share.
Yeah, they're not actually from me. They're from the guys upstairs, and this is written at a time when I was very new to communicating with them, and they actually wrote some of the foreword, and then I invited them to write the afterword. And let me read these. This is about 5 paragraphs, but I think it's right on point. Because when we ended our last session, I was mentioning that they said you got to see the world two ways. So here's what they told me. This is back in 1999. Reader, during the past few weeks, we have been drumming into Frank's mind, though he usually thinks he is doing the thinking, that the gift he has to offer the world, insofar as it is contained in writing, is the unique viewpoint that sees the affairs of this world and the other world as equally important, equally real. Most choose one or the other. The result of making so false a choice, we suggest, is a crippling unreality. This is the false choice, the wrong turning, if you will, that has crippled your culture. How can one find the most productive road if half the possible choices are unsuspected, if half the landscape is unsuspected? We end as we began. There are not two worlds, but one world. Not two realities, but one reality containing an infinitude of seeming realities. Not a dream world and a real world, but a world that is a real dream. That is, reality is a dream. The dream is the reality. Same thing, said seemingly differently because of the difference in starting point and emphasis. You, we, everyone, everything, are part of one indissoluble reality. Thus, everything impinges on, colors, everything else. Nothing can exist in isolation because there is no isolation to exist in. All is one. Separations are illusion. Not that it is a magic trick or a delusion, but that the appearance of separation masks and blurs an underlying connection. Just as space is not separate, just as time is not separate, but each is considered to be made of separate parcels so that they may be apprehended, so reality, in the widest possible sense, is not separate, but all one thing. Live in that knowledge. Know that you overlook any one facet of reality only at the price of, to that extent, disregarding what is. In a quotation, I say, you are gods. Of course, how could it be otherwise? You are also rocks and sky, as actors in a movie might be said to be individual actors, but also might be said to be part of that movie. Is either view of things untrue? Is either view the only valid way to see it? We say to you, see things as they are. The only way to do that, since neither the one viewpoint nor the other is the only correct way to describe reality, is to alternate from one to the other, or to overlap with them, dealing with a slight resultant confusion and fuzziness, or to see one way while remembering the other way. Then you will be whole. And that was the last word.
Well, what's particularly fascinating to me is hearing that again, having just talked about Bohm's implicate and explicit orders. It is a restatement of that same thing. And yet at the same time, as I'm thinking about that, I'm also thinking about, within various religious practices and whatnot, it's also that.
I think I'm not sure how much of this is my thinking and how much is things I've snagged from them. They were careful to put in a little veiled insult there, although he usually thinks he's doing the thinking, which is unfortunately true. But I think that every worldview has to, this is a harsh way to say it, but in a way, it has to cripple itself because it cannot count everything from every point of view at once. And so what it finds important has to be the center. And everything has to have a center. But by having a center, by the laws of perspective, you're distorting every other relationship. It can't be helped. That's why they're saying, okay, look at it this way, see the world this way, then see the world this way, and realize they're both equally true, even if you can't see them both at the same time. Or if you do see it, it's going to be blurry and hard to deal with. I think you've had scientists who were very religious, mostly in Europe, mostly in the past, I would guess. You've had religious who were very scientific, like Teilhard de Chardin. And again, well, I won't generalize as to where and when, but mostly, I think people tend to stay within their comfort zone, and they're born in that comfort zone, whether they know it or not. So that for some people, the world is obviously things in space. For other people, like myself, the world is obviously energy in flux. I don't know how else to put it, you know? Well, both of those are true, but neither one of them is exclusively true. It's just, this is the way I choose to experience the world, or not even a matter of choice. This is the way my robots tell me the world is, end of story, boom.
Yeah.
And there's where the mistake comes in.
Well, and we started off in the previous section talking about how science at its core is an exploration trying to find truth and reality. And religion's the same. They're starting from very different places and structuring in very different ways. Both are searching for the same thing.
Good science and good theology ought to both lead in the same direction. And I would add, so should good art.
Yeah. Life in general.
Pardon?
Life in general. And that also goes to the point where people sometimes will ask me what my religious beliefs are, and I'm not able to explain them for the very reasons of what we're talking about. It's I don't hold the ideas in the same way.
I don't know that I could explain mine, although I'm constantly doing it. But I don't know that it. I mean, to make a concise, consistent statement would be to lop off a lot of context.
Exactly.
And it can't be helped. I mean, that's the nature of words. And of course, my life was all words. You know, so it's trying to say what can't be said. And and as you know from overhearing the guys over the years, what they do when they get in that situation, they'll throw in an analogy, and they'll say, "But there's another analogy like this, and maybe even a third analogy at a different angle." And they're saying, "Now take what it has in common, and let go of the other parts of the analogy, which would tend to be a little too concrete." You know, the analogy can get in the way if the analogy is too bright and shiny, but you just want it to point yourself in a certain way. But even they are unable to. You would think that they would have all the ability to make these things clear, but if it can't be said, it can't be said, and it can't be whistled either, as Jack Kerouac pointed out.
Well, and part of for me is when I look at this and talking with the guys upstairs or any of the related kinds of things, I treat these as speculative inputs. And the skeptical part of me is constantly going, is that real? Does that really work? Which, as you've noted, those are meaningless questions. But at the same time, they provide the fodder for driving the exploration of what is.
I wouldn't say those are meaningless questions. I would say a meaningless question would be more like, how do I know that this is X and not Y?
You're right.
But the questions are actually very good questions. Is it real? Can I trust it? And in religious terms, they would say, test the spirits. You know, you got an insight, you got something that cannot be measured, so therefore it is not in the realm of science. It can't be measured, but you've got it, and it feels real to you. But you can't put all your money on baby shoes in the seventh at Hialeah just because you had a thought that did it. Now, some people do, and maybe they're lucky. Maybe they win. Maybe they don't.
Yeah. More not than do.
Oh, sure.
But yes.
Sure. Now, in our case, your case and mine, although I'm sure our readers will find it, our listeners will find this hard to believe, we're not actually flakes. But the common sense behind what we do is not at all obvious to people, I think. You know, I think it looks like we just grab something almost at random and decide to believe it, as opposed to being tutored by reality.
Exactly.
Okay, this happened. I don't understand it. Maybe it's this. Let's work on this assumption for a while. That's how I work anyway.
Well, it's kind of like the thing that you started in the last section, talking about the knowns and the unknowns and the unknown unknowns and all of that, that as it being one category, not many. Because in my case, when I see something happen, there are different ways that I can pursue it and look at it. From hard science world, I can have something that is really hard science where I can do things and I can show the effect to somebody who is not versed in science. And it's freaking magic. There's no possibility to do what I just did, and yet it's absolutely just stock reality. On the other hand, with hard science folks, what I can do is the opposite, where I will do something that comes out of things that I know to be real and true, that I don't have any clue how they actually work, but like the light bulb experiment, I can make it happen.
Yeah.
I'll demonstrate that to them, and it's pure freaking magic again.
It occurred to me, one way we could look at this is that science tries to build up from what it knows generalizations about how things work, including exceptions. I mean, a good scientist knows that his whole business is about falsifying what he thinks. And if he can't falsify it, then he keeps going, which is fine. But you know what? I think religious people, I hate that word, religious and spiritual. They have so many bad connotations. They have so many distracting connotations. A person who is, let's call, okay, for the moment, let's make the distinction between scientists and intuitives. And of course, it's a false distinction, but let's go that at this point. An intuitive experiences something and has no idea how or why. It cannot, that person cannot build the foundation under it. This is the one that builds the castles in the air. This is the one that can put the foundation under the castles. But the intuitive could tell the scientist, look over here because this is where the magic is. The scientist could say, here's how the magic happened. You know, if they would work together, when they do work together, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
I think most of your great scientists are probably mystics.
Well, there are a lot of that kind of things that go on. Some of the famous scientists have, I've forgotten which particular one. I won't name names because I'm going to have get it wrong. I'd have to go look it up. But there was one of the most famous of the physicists doing work in a university, and his grad students and others that worked with him, they would set up these elaborate experiments and things testing this bleeding edge science. And part of the rule was that they could only do the experiments when he wasn't there. Because if he was there, it would screw up the results. And they had one experiment they did, and the results came out bizarre and weird. And after the fact, they learned that he was literally driving by the building when they did the experiment.
That's great.
I've seen things like this happen. I saw this happen at an experiment at Hanford where
is this the
fusion cell. Yeah,
that's what I wanted to. Yeah, go ahead.
So there's a man named Patterson. He and his grandson, and he was working on a cold fusion cell. And the details of how it's constructed are really not tremendously important in the moment. But basically, this device, what they had discovered, they wanted to create it to put it on hot water heaters where you could put cold water in, you get hot water with no inputs, no wiring. Well, it's not created out of nowhere. There's a longer explanation for what the physics is that might be happening, but it's not within accepted science. So anyway, they're experimenting with this. And one of the things that he had run across was that if you ran radioactive materials through this cell, the radiation counts went down. Like, wait a minute, how does this work? And so he ended up doing a interview with one of the morning shows on TV. And the folks also did an interview with a researcher from Pacific Northwest National Labs. And then the national program interleaved the two together. And from that, they ended up creating an invitation from the national lab for him to come demonstrate what he's doing. Where they didn't intend to invite him, but the news program basically created the invitation for him. So he came out to Hanford and he met with a whole group of physicists and whatnot, and they set up an experiment where they had a a Patterson power cell and a loop of tubing and a radiation detector, really fancy radiation detector. They know everything that's in it. And basically what they did is they set it up in the morning on 3 separate days. They injected a particular, very controlled radioactive material into it, which was a uranium salt and its radioactive daughter products. And then they just let this thing circulate for the day. And it's this is such an exciting experiment. It's like watching paint dry. There is nothing going on. The thing is just gathering data and it's doing its thing. And there's all these people sitting around. So they did that on a Friday. And when they got done, they cleaned it up, disposed of all the materials and whatnot, and went off and had their evening. Came back the next day and did the same thing, and the next day did the same thing. The only difference being that on Saturday, Old Man Patterson went out with the chief researcher on his boat fishing on the Columbia River. And so they spent the day out on the river, whereas on the other 2 days, they didn't. When they gathered the data together, there's like 18 physicists with single, double, and triple doctorates that are working on this thing, trying to understand what happened. What they saw was radioactive materials go away. Now, is it plating out? What's happening here? They're trying to understand the cell and what it's doing. And so they're analyzing the data, and they're being very closed-mouthed about it. And it happens, I'm involved in a committee.
But they are.
I could probe them and ask questions, though mostly they would not answer them. And so I kept asking the chief researcher over time, these questions about, what they're seeing. And it's like, well, it's very interesting, but he wouldn't talk. And so then I had an idea about what I thought was happening in the cell. And so I would speculate to him, what you're seeing is this. And his answer always was, how'd you know? But then he wouldn't give me any more. And so the next time we'd meet a month or two later, I'd give him another piece. It's like, well, how'd you know? And this went on for almost a year. Finally, I managed to press hard enough that they agreed to do a presentation. And it was a 1-page presentation of the data to a group called the Science Technology Coordination Group. And it's like 30 people in the room, almost all scientists and whatnot, that decided on what to fund for research on cleanup at Hanford. And there's a lot of money involved. He did the presentation, and what it showed, and this was only ever presented once, it's never been published, even though they had said they would publish it, they never did. What it showed was that on Friday and on Sunday, the levels of radioactivity declined rather greatly, actually declined. And sodium and aluminum and certain other elements appeared in the solution, because they were testing the chemistry as well, that had no place to come from the cell itself.
And you know what I said the first time you told me this immediately, but keep going.
So anyway, they did the presentation, and I'm waiting for the reaction of the hard science folks. And Don Wadrich, a gentleman was a friend of mine that he was a DOE manager, passed away now. He finally, at the end, he paused and he had this very exasperated look. He says, "Are you trying to tell me this thing transmutes nuclear waste?" And the chief researcher just kind of leaned back and smiled. He says, "Well, we don't like to use that word, but yes."
And you remember, that's exactly the word I used immediately.
And I then, I'm trying to get the group to fund this experiment. There's something here. I don't know what the something is, but there's clearly something here. They would not go near it.
You might as well have asked them to get a witch doctor to approve it. It would have invalidated what they thought were the rules of scientific inquiry.
Right. Now, 2 additional parts. The one part is that on Saturday, nothing happened.
Yeah.
The solution went around in circles. Radiation levels didn't change at all. The only difference was that Old Man Patterson wasn't in the room.
Yeah.
Okay, how does that work? Number one. Number two, my idea about what's happening had to do with some things that deal with the way that atomic nuclei spin and certain conditions that it can occur. And what I had predicted and what I had been telling the chief researcher and that he confirmed was happening, and they saw it in the experiment, was only the odd-numbered radionuclides decayed. The evens didn't. Well, this, along with everything else, is a hint that there is hard science here. Something very explainable is happening if we can understand the explanation. And it happens, I think I know what the explanation is and how it works, and it's massively important. But because it didn't fit the filters, it couldn't go forward. There wasn't an explanation in advance.
It's more than didn't fit the filters. It actually potentially invalidated the filters, and they could not afford for that to happen, or they felt they couldn't afford it. And now a mystic or someone on the intuitive end might have said, well, as I said transmutation, because to my mind, that's not a particular barrier. It's been reported over the centuries. A lot of those reports have to be wrong. Some of them have to be fabricated, but some of them, there's always a nub of truth to anything. And if you think that this is things in space, then you got to figure out how can it go from here to here. But if you think it's all one thought form that that everything interfaces with everything else, the fact that one key part of the experiment was a man's physical proximity is unlikely, but it's not impossible. I still don't understand why distance should make a difference in anything, but it clearly does.
Sometimes, yeah. Now, going back to what our topic was for this talk, we were talking about religion and science. This is an example that doesn't fit in any of that. It's like, how do you frame this in your mind? And the problem is that the people involved, from any perspective, didn't have a frame in which to hang it.
Well, I think this does actually go right to that, because what we're looking at is two different angles of vision, each incomplete. There's no way that the mystic can tell you how it happened. There's no way the scientist can admit that it did happen if he's caught in that paradigm, because it seems to him to destroy the rationality upon which the paradigm is based. So he's not going to do that. That, I think, is the key, because and I know scientists and religious people and intuitives, everybody, nobody's perfect. I mean, maybe you and me, but most of the rest of them, they're not perfect. And I don't think ever could be, and it's a good thing.
Well, the other part that always strikes me with things like this is a very dry experiment. There's lots of data. It's just numbers. But when you actually see what the data is saying, it's astounding, and it opens all kinds of doors.
The odd thing is,
people get to see that.
I'm sorry.
It's not often people get to see that.
The odd thing to me is, here's an experiment which doesn't portend doom. It actually offers a tremendous way forward to deal with really bad problems. And they won't. Well, I don't say they won't. If they had a choice, they probably would look at it and deal with it. But their subconscious robots are keeping that reality away from any possibility of being explored seriously. Even when the guy said, we don't like to use the word, but that's what's going on, even that did not penetrate, because that's a different, the abstract thought might look at it, but this is the way reality is, couldn't look at it. And, probably in 50 years, they'll take it for granted.
Well, one of the things I expected of the 18 or so physicists that were involved, I expected one or many of them would have thought, ooh, there's something here. We have to go figure this out.
There's multiple Nobel Prizes here.
Yeah, and maybe they're still working on it. I don't know. But that was, 15, 20 years ago now.
Well, it's true. That's a good caveat. It could be happening in the background and us not know about it. But but if it is happening, I still will stick with the idea they had to overcome some really serious internal, what should we call them, obstacles. Not that we have them, but other people.
No, we're perfect, of course.
I think we established that earlier.
I have no blind spots. I never make errors, and I'm always perfect. Yeah, right.
I thought I was the only one. So there's two of us.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what anybody will make of this, but all of this, everything you and I have to offer depends upon people being able to take us seriously enough to even think about it. If they assume A, they're crazy, or B, they're lying, or both, there's no way they can get anything from it. But I hope that we've at least showed what the problem is. And again, I didn't intend when I suggested this subject to bring it up to robots, but it keeps coming back to that. It keeps coming back to, we have a distorted view of reality. And there's another topic for us, and that is life more abundantly or life more consciously, because one of the preconditions is reduce the amount of robots that are structuring your reality beneath and before your own perceptions.
Well, and just as an example of the robots that run underneath, and we should talk just a little bit before we end here about what robots are. One of the robots that I have that operates is when I hear the word abundantly, my mind auto translates into gathering of wealth and whatnot, which is not what's meant by the phrase. But
No, no.
it to me, what I have to do is I have to translate to living life more richly, which strangely is about the same word, but for me it has different connotations. And what you end up with is this idea about robots being these self-operating thoughts that are like programs, that they're doing things actively within the mind, that they can end up changing your life rather dramatically without you realizing they're happening.
What they do is to truncate our possibilities, because and it's only, it doesn't matter what their substance is, because if it were conscious, it wouldn't matter. We could at any moment say yes or no. The difficulty is they are beneath the level of our consciousness, and therefore we take it for reality. Just like if you're in a mood, the whole world is shown through that mood, and you would swear this is the way things are. Everything stinks, And if like the Limburger joke, but by the way, speaking of the robots, that's an easily explained thing. I think I take it as a system of automatic reactions that have been set in place by earlier decisions, implicit or explicit. And just like unresolved feelings, robots have no sense of time. They don't know that you said, this is what I need at age 15, and I'm not 15 anymore. But the flip side of that is bring it into consciousness, reprogram it, and tell, oh, by the way, I'm not quite 15 anymore. Then they will still do what you want, but now it'll be what you want now and not what you wanted then.
And I think that leads to another topic we should come to, which gets into John Lilly's idea of the layers of programming of the mind as we develop from childhood onward, that is tied to that very idea.
All right, make a note, because I don't know anything about that. We'll maybe learn something next time.
Yeah, cool.
All right. Well, again, thank you for a good discussion.
Indeed, it's been fun. And we'll talk next time. Thank you.
Sounds like a plan.
If you enjoyed this episode, please press like. Please press subscribe to stay informed of new episodes as they appear. We would love to hear from you in the comments section below, and we wish you the very best in connecting with your own guidance.